Why the sands run red. The sky cracked and contorted under the pressure of the invading force's chariot of storm clouds and battering lightning bolts. Wind whipped up, beat the lavender of the fields into flight and fancy at the feet of the warriors entering their arena. We've done too much talking. No formations have been called, leadership established, or even weapons drawn by a hand willing to do the work. Ishbaal, captain of the Gibra, spoke out in a soft voice to his men in the open air. His most direct subordinates answered his stern whispers at his side with their own retorts and observations. Shema, the warrior of the wind, calmly answered his leader. Is the channeler so essential that all else had to be forsaken? He walked a step ahead of Ishbaal, feeling the storm winds fresh for himself. No longer was he cast in the protective shadow of his leader, a monument of the battlefield. His knee buckled an inch, and his feet anchored into the earth. Was knowing the names of his generals more impactful than letting them do their work? On the other side was the warrior of fire, Abishai, whose nature was like the fires of war itself. We're about to find out, he retorted in a quick fashion. The only thing we can do is what we know how. He stepped forward next, his knees buckling in a similar manner to his counterparts. He laughed and raised his arm to shield his eyes from the debris being flung about the field. King David has already begun his psalms. I can feel my body relaxing, gaining life, Ishbaal observed. The channeler is having trouble keeping us anchored. Through the partition of plants, dirt, and looming clouds, bodies began to appear from the sky. They were ghastly. Their frames were a mangled gray, and their robes shared the dull and tattered motif. Abishai noticed their weapons and the way that they seemed to be borrowed and twisted. The same could be said of certain characteristics of their bodies. Did they actually have any unique aspects? Or were these warriors just the amalgamations of worlds conquered? They fall like the first snow, Ishbaal whispered in awe, like death from the heavens. It seemed as if even the storms calmed during his moment of admiration. Angels reclined into their wings, and their mouths ran agape, their bodies contorting in agony. It seemed as if the psalms had not reached the formations in the air yet. Ishbaal saw the aether rising, caressing their heels, but not yet set into their bodies. He watched as the leader of the angels, Michael, leaned into the wind. His face was full of scorn, while silently showing disapproval for the cowardice of his horde. He flexed and beat his heavy wings to the air. A shockwave gale shattered the formations under him and caused even his allies to fall to their knees. Silently, he told the entirety of Jeremie's forces to advance and fear not. For their fear was his to own. No sooner had he done this than the storms began to intensify, and a large funnel broke the clouds, barreling down into the lavender. It revealed an army of flung and angry shiver, each of them scrambling to their feet and running to get first blood. A deafening crack erupted overhead as Michael advanced at a bolt's pace, the first kill of the war set firmly in his eyes. He shattered the aerial formations of his enemy, snatching the head of a shiver and holding it high above the battlefield. Be moved to bloodlust. This enemy has chosen a most beautiful grave amongst the flowers and light of the city. Ishbaal became enraged. He was reduced to being able to only obtain the second kill of the war. That blood was not as sweet. However, he would settle for it all the same, because he couldn't fathom the bitterness of the third kill. That he cracked the ground in his charge. His men kept to his back and his pace. They bore witness to his sword, drawn, revealing a blood-rust-covered blade. That blade crashed through skulls, bodies, and everything else that was put in the way. Shammah and Abishai followed suit, the first covering the back of his fellows, and Abishai performing a deadly dance of blades that ended with him pushing his spear through the cranium of an agonized Shiver. And from his periphery he saw Ishbaal cleave a body clean in half. They both cried out in battle fury. Their roars shook the field, and the dance continued. Few warriors joined each of their own captains and fought in the shadows of what they sought and admired. In the shade of Abishai, in particular, there was a Gibram who hacked Shivers to death, wallowed in the blood, and licked his own blade clean. His yipping howl met Abishai's ears and was reciprocated. Ishbaal smirked as the dust of his killers was kicked up into the throats of the invaders. His crimson cape blustered in the wind and seemed to fly in slow motion as he took a march over the fields. His walk was met by the challenge of various Shiver, each who thought themselves valiant before the blade met their brow. He then saw the sky, covered in angels and dragons, a scene from the legends of the dismissal of Satan from heaven, and his faith in his own purpose on the field was reaffirmed. His eyes reflected awe of the glances. In between slayings of the mightiest angel and his fight with a dragon whose wings blocked the sun, the living shade affected the morale of the warriors. The ebb in spirit was palpable, and from the rear, from the mouth of the great King David, came incantations of power, psalms of force that strengthened every aeon in the field. All of them emanated red ether, and their fury pulsed at the rise in power. From the rear now came the second intervention, although it was unintended. A blast of pure duality shot from a source behind them and into the body of the massive dragon. It sent the beast and its rider to the earth in a massive thud, and pained roars scraped the battlefield. The rider, a taller Shiver, with more elaborate armor and a giant sword, came to his feet and walked into the grasses, almost unfazed by his fall. In one swipe, he killed men as if he were only mowing grass. His head would make up for the second place kill.